So welcome in any case. This is an online training course on the new GG 103 standard, and introduction and general requirements for sustainable development and design. My name is Colin Hull. I'm Highways England's Senior Advisor in Sustainable Development and Climate Change, and I'll be presenting today alongside my colleague Ken Brodie, our Senior Advisor in Sustainable Development and Design. Hannah, if we could go to the next slide. Okay, this introductory slide sets out who this module is aimed at. Hopefully you'll recognize your role in this list, but if you are not in the list, you're more than welcome at this training session. There are a few things that you can expect to learn from the session, and this includes gaining an understanding of the benefits of the new standard for sustainable development and design, requirements for projects, how consideration of sustainable development and design relates to the delivery of road projects, and how to demonstrate application of the standard. We've got quite a full session today, but do use the instant messaging to ask questions, as Hannah said, and we'll follow these up either at the end or after the session. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, Hannah. Okay, so many of you on the call will have seen this slide before because a number of these events have been run, but for the benefit of everyone, it's useful to be aware of where DMRB applies and the language and verb structure employed within it. So GG 101 is your reference document on how DMRB should be used. Some points to note are that the requirements and advice in DMRB relate to works on the motorway and all-purpose trunk roads. It's also for the use of competent practitioners, so those with the appropriate skill level to work with and apply the standard. There are some specific competency requirements in the National Application Annex to GG 103. Section E 3.8 to 9. These are specific to GG 103. The key thing to note on this slide are the verb forms, which in DMRB, across all the DMRB documents, convey a specific meaning. As I say, many of you will be familiar with these by now, but some won't. You do have must, which is a statutory or legislative requirement. Shall, where you see shall referred to in a clause, it's a requirement of the overseeing organisation. So in this training session, we're focusing on Highways England and the England Strategic Road Network. Should is where is advice expressed as a recommendation. May is a permissible approach. Advice expresses a permissible approach, and can is used to introduce notes or provide clarification. Watch out for all of those terms as you read the document, particularly requirements with a shall or a must. Okay, the next slide, please, Hannah. GG 103 sits in volume 0 of DMRB. So Hannah, you may need to click a couple of times on this one to show the areas I'm highlighting. But volume 0 falls into two broad areas. So part 1 is the index and context, which is useful for navigating the DMRB and shows which standards have been withdrawn, as well as standards that are currently published. GG 101 also sets out the scope of application, the role of national application annexes, and the new DMRB structure and coding system. Part 2 contains general guidance. Note that the G prefix describes the volume within which a document falls, so G indicates that the volume is general information. This is followed by a second letter which describes the document part and discipline. G as a second letter is general principles and scheme governance. GG 103 therefore is grouped with the other general principles and scheme governance documents. If we could go to the next slide, please, Hannah. Okay, so in terms of document layout and structure, the document broadly follows the structure of other GG general guidance documents. However, there are a series of sections which are unique to GG 103 that deal with how sustainable development and design will be considered. Readers will notice that there are a series of high-level clauses in the core document, but a national application annex is also included that adds further England-specific detail. This training is mostly focused on the core document, the main document, and where we refer to a national application annex, we are referring to the England annex. Okay, so next slide, please. So to talk about the scope a bit, the scope in this GG 103 document is actually quite brief, but does include some important things to note, including that the standard is applicable to all design work on the strategic road network. So it's not just aimed at certain projects, it's all projects with an element of design. It also focuses on the whole design life cycle from stage 0 through to the end of first life. So it's not just about the immediate effect of constructing something, but also how the feature in question will perform during operation and at the end of its life. There's an important reason behind this focus on design. It's because so many sustainability issues are effectively locked in by design. Once something's designed, while we might be able to construct it in an efficient way or use it as best we can with sustainability in mind, meeting sustainability goals is so much easier if we build sustainability considerations into design. And there's a diagram on this sheet which I was going to talk through, which is from the Treasury's Infrastructure Carbon Review. And this recognised the role that design plays in saving carbon in infrastructure. Looking at the diagram on this slide allows us to sort of potentially build less, shows us that we can potentially build less and build clever at the design stage, streamlining resource consumption requirements in the process. While this graph here that I've put as an example applies to carbon, the same can be said on other aspects of sustainability. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. There are plenty of terms and definitions in this quite holistic document. So do note the terms and definitions as you're reading it. There are quite a number of technical terms floating around in the sustainability arena, and where they're used in the document, these are explained right at the front, as well as at the front of each national application annex. For the purpose of this presentation, there are a few key terms to note. I've touched on design life cycle and end of first life already. While on the previous slide you'll have seen those terms. But these are defined by this slide. It's worth noting that while we also use terms such as whole life in the document, in a more circular economy, that whole life could involve several incarnations of materials and products. However, we can only reasonably anticipate the life cycle of the designed asset, not what it may become after its eventual decommissioning. So the focus of this standard is on one life cycle of a designed asset. However, by following the standard, that should really allow subsequent repurposing of assets after the end of first life. I've also included a definition of resource efficiency here. I think, well, I've included this because much of sustainability is about the efficient use of resources. Ultimately, using resources efficiently, whether they be materials, energy, plant or people, is fundamental to making sustainability gains and also monetary savings. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. So this slide is about the importance of identifying legal, environmental, economic, social, legal, environmental, economic, social, and cultural factors in sustainable development and design. Rather than offering a one-size-fits-all notion of sustainable development and good design, GG 103 seeks to ensure design is informed by the distinctive elements of the environment around it. So a design for a road scheme may include an area with a potential for improved health outcomes, for example, or may suffer from something like higher air pollution, or may even have might publish a strategy or something like that for economic growth. Perhaps a design might pass through a historic landscape or seascape or townscape. While we broadly define goals of sustainable development in this standard, it's the local context which shape how they will be balanced and applied. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So this looks at factors, opportunities and risks in sustainable development and design. So in the last slide we talked a bit about the local context to sustainable development, why that's important and how that's recognised by the standard. But section 3 in this standard seeks to ensure that opportunities and risks are addressed. While often these opportunities and risks come from the local context, there are also elements of risk that are inherent to the project that need to be addressed. So, for example, if there's an example here, while a sustainable development goal may be pursued, it's important that this takes account of any legal risks. For example, would the design of a feature to manage flood risk be consistent with the regulations on water quality? Would an innovative design still ensure compliance with the requirements of the Equalities Act? So these are all examples of opportunities and risks that need to be taken account of. It's not just the present day context where risk occurs. Future trends may also carry risk or opportunity. Would a design be vulnerable to future climate risk, for example? Or might future demographic, technological trends present risks and opportunities? And of course, cost is always a risk within infrastructure projects. There's a bit of an adage in sustainability circles, which you may well have heard, that if sustainability costs you more, you're doing it wrong. Across the life cycle, this stands to reason, as resource efficiency is such a core part of sustainable development. Lower construction costs, better operational performance, lower risks from climate change, safer construction are just some of the benefits that may be realised if the risks and opportunities associated with sustainable development and design are managed appropriately. So the guidance here gives you some guidance on what opportunities and risks you should consider. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. The standard includes 12 goals of sustainable development. You can see that these are quite broad ranging. You've got everything from sort of improve health, safety and well-being, support a sustainable economy, embrace innovation, minimize greenhouse gas emissions, So we hope we've encompassed quite a broad suite of what sustainable development actually means on the ground. So the goals themselves were arrived at through, well, pretty extensive discussions between ourselves and devolved administrations. And while the high-level goals reflect shared priorities for sustainable development, within the national application annexes, individual overseeing organisations have published further guidance and requirements. The goals, actually, if you follow the Sustainable Development Agenda, you might be interested to know that the goals build on the wider international understanding of sustainable development. So they've come from a few sources, not just things like our Highways England Sustainable Development Strategy, but also big high-level goals such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they're written in a way which seeks to ensure relevance to road design. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so there are a few points to note really in relation to the goals. So you'll see that when you read the document that the goals are supported by a series of shall requirements. So there are requirements that we, Highways England, require, we specify. They need to be delivered throughout the design life cycle, so where they affect construction, operation and end of life. These are goals rather than endpoints. So while each goal is to be aspired to, the end point of each goal is not defined. What is important is that the local, legal, environmental, economic, social and cultural factors are assessed in relation to the delivery of goals, and that opportunities and risks are assessed. Some goals may align with other goals, and many aspects of design will combine to deliver multiple goals. So while in most cases a design will be able to make at least some contribution to the goals, a lot depends on what's being designed. In this respect, a design solution shall take all reasonable steps to maximize contribution towards all goals of sustainable development. Okay, so at this point I'm handing over to my colleague Ken. Ken, you may need to take control at this point.
Okay, or I think, are you going to just continue to change them, Hannah?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Yes, as Colin said, the goals of sustainable development are really supported by our 10 principles of good road design. As we see, design has a fundamental role in achieving sustainable development. So design decisions affect the economy, environment, and society, both now and in the future. Good design therefore supports sustainable development, and design that isn't sustainable, we would argue, is fundamentally poor. In addition to producing roads that are safe, functional, and most importantly efficient, design also plays a key role in how places are perceived, their look and feel, or their sense of place. A good understanding of context is essential, and responding appropriately to a location or place is at the heart of our design vision for the network, which you can read here. This reinforces a local sense of place and identity, benefiting both communities and drivers who should really know where they are in the country on the network. So next slide. So our 10 principles are listed here. and the standard includes or how these principles were arrived at. It was through extensive discussions between ourselves and the Highways England Strategic Design Panel. They're based on universal principles of good design, and they were first published in The Road to Good Design in 2018, which you may have seen. They're set out in the National Application Annex, and this is to allow devolved administrations to formulate their own specific principles. Those here are the ones that apply to Highways England and the Strategic Road Network. Principles connect people, places, and processes to support better design outcomes. The principles are grouped into these three themes so that design responds better to both place, people, through improved design processes. The people principles include safe and useful, so this may be by supporting access to growth, for example. Inclusive, by placing people at the heart of design. Understandable, by providing clarity to drivers. Place principles include fitting into the context by using local materials, traditions, for example, in construction. Restrained, by responding elegantly to the context. And environmentally sustainable, by seeking to achieve net environmental gain. The four process principles include thorough, by creating harmony from understanding. Innovation, by responding positively to change and opportunities that present themselves. Collaborative, by engaging with people. And long-lasting, with an idea that you're actually building tomorrow's heritage. So the next slide. So some of the key points with regard to the principles is really the idea that potential negative impact should be designed out at an early stage where possible. Do not try to rely on mitigation. It's actually probably a sign of poor design. A deep understanding of context will aid design decision making. So design decisions should not be arbitrary. And this idea of context informing those decisions is very important. And even just keep in mind that what can be perceived as a minor decision can have a significant impact on appearance and sustainability, particularly decisions that are made later on in the process. I think too it's important to recognize design starts at scheme inception, as Colin said earlier, and it continues through into construction, obviously with the implications for operation and eventual decommissioning. So even deciding to build a road from A to B without even a notion of necessarily the route is a design decision in its broadest sense. So good design, it's important to remember, is not simply about appearance or aesthetics. As with sustainable development, good design is not an add-on or a nice to have to consider at the end of the process. It's really essential to sustainable development and successful outcomes. And part of this thinking of considering it early on is that, as Colin said, as the scheme progresses, the cost of change increases, so it's critical the design principles and the goals of sustainable development are considered from the start. So next. In terms of monitoring, evaluating, and reporting, the standard goes into a bit of detail. And while the most important thing is that GG 103 influences and shapes design, there are also some requirements around evidencing design approach, the achievement of the goals of sustainable development and good design, which are set out in the National Application Annex. For sustainable development, the approach is not meant to be onerous and is a simple act of constructing a narrative on how the requirements in GG 103 have been taken into account. There's no set format for doing this, so long as it accords with the requirements of Section E3. Designers may wish to discuss with their Highways England contact a suitable format, which may not necessarily be a standard Word document, for example. Most importantly, the documentation should be concise, not lengthy, and as many sustainable development goals be evidenced through other assessments, signposting should be used to indicate where more detailed information is held. Similarly, for good design, the approach is not meant to be onerous, and the focus should be on narrative. What is the context, and how has the design responded to it, and the principles of good design. The project control framework project design report should be used to evidence the achievement of good design, with some flexibility with regard to format depending on the scheme or project. The development of a parallel design narrative is encouraged from inception, for example, to guide the development of the design through into construction. Housing England shall be consulted to determine whether design review is required by our strategic design panel, although all schemes are encouraged to engage with this review process. Scheme sensitivity will determine whether a design review is required, and if so, evidence should be submitted as to how the design responded to a review if it was held. Evidence on the application of good design should also accord with criteria for good design outlined in the National Policy Statement for national networks. So the next slide. Sort of continuing on with monitoring, evaluating, and reporting, there is a potential approach to meeting requirements set out in Appendix EB of the National Application Index. So we've just shown an image of the page from the index here, but in summary, the process outlined starts with identifying the legal, environmental, social, and cultural factors and the opportunities and risks that a scheme presents. Next is really reviewing the goals of sustainable development and principles of good design, and identifying relevant information from other assessments to consider how this can inform a response to the goals and the principles. So much of the kind of context or background information will be coming from other assessments. Next would be to consider the synergies and distinctions between the goals and the principles. Although there is some overlap and the principles are there to support the goals, there will be distinctions between the two. Apply the goals and principles, associated requirements to the design, and then document how the goals have been applied. Again, evidencing the legal, environmental, economic, and social and cultural factors, and also the risks and opportunities and how these have either been taken or managed. In terms of the principles, document how these have been applied, paying particular attention to how sensitivity of location or place and local communities have influenced the approach. And finally, submit the design and the evidence to Highways England. So next, just in terms of outcomes, just showing you some examples here. But the idea is sustainable development, good design can result in many outcomes, and there's really a wealth of innovation in this space to achieve the desired outcomes. So for example, the image in the top left shows how incorporating better access and connectivity can contribute to minimizing greenhouse gases, as well as ensuring access to all. So this is inclusive design supporting sustainable development goals. The top middle image shows a sustainable drainage system. This can improve resilience to climate change, can benefit water quality, and enhances the surrounding environment. The final image, top right, shows construction work on the A160. Here, lower temperature asphalt and the use of mobile batching plants produced recycled subbase, saved carbon, saved HGV movements and time. So it contributed to resource efficiency, safety, and minimizing greenhouse gases. So this was really innovation supporting sustainable development. The bottom left shows the Itford Farm Bridleway Bridge and the South Downs Way National Trail. And this replaced a difficult and dangerous at-grade crossing in the A26. It's designed in harmony with its rural setting, which is an outstanding area of natural beauty. So this is inclusive design that's fitting with context. The bottom middle image shows the use of traditional locally sourced dry stone walls on the A590 high and low Newton bypass. And again, this reinforces the road's connection to the Cumbrian landscape, but also locally sourcing this material reduced HGV movements, provided local employment as well. And the very last image on the bottom right is second Severn Crossing, where innovative wind shielding resulted in fewer closures due to high winds, and this reduced the impact of closures on the local and regional economy. So this is really innovative design, supporting resilience and the economic sustainability. So just a few kind of ideas of how both the goals and the principles can be applied and the outcomes.
I think I'm taking over
yeah,
again.
Sorry, Colin. Okay.
Okay. So I think hopefully you can see this summary slide. I apologize, I can't see the screen, but hopefully you can see the summary slide now. Really this is just sort of summarizing what we've talked about today, some of the key points that you might want to take away with you. I do sort of recommend delving into the standard and getting to know some of the clauses, getting to know the goals of sustainable development and the principles. So the key things to note really are sustainable development and design requirements are at the front end of DMRB amongst general information standards. We think that puts them at a in an important place really. They're quite prominent in DMRB. They are important considerations. Okay. The requirements apply to all schemes on the motorway and all-purpose trunk roads. You'll see as you read the GG 103 that the clauses are written in such a way that they are applicable to the very broad suite of projects that we design and construct on the strategic road network. So in some ways you might read them and think they're very broad and high level, but that is really to capture just that very point that the requirements apply to all schemes on the motorway and all-purpose trunk roads. Can't really stress this third point enough really, that focusing on design allows the most potential to achieve sustainable development. You'll recall I showed earlier in the presentation the graph from the infrastructure carbon review, a very sloping banana slide type graph, which shows right at the top you've got planning and design, and that is where, if you can embed sustainability and good design at that right at the outset, stage 0, and in those early stages of design, you're setting the course for achieving sustainable development. So that's really important. It's so often you'll get sustainable development as a kind of a bolt-on to design, or a bolt-on later on in a project, And that's not the way we want to do things. We want it to be embedded right at the outset. Sustainable development and design may look different in different locations, so must respond to a range of factors. We've talked a lot around the sort of context, the environmental, social, cultural context to sustainable development, and we've also talked about the sort of that it's not just the context around you; it's a sort of temporal context as well. So it's really important to look at the context as you're delivering the goals of sustainable development and the principles of good road design. That they're not blanket things that apply in identical ways everywhere. They should be interpreted alongside that local context. Sustainable development is best demonstrated by designs that address a range of opportunities and risks. Obviously, when you're looking at high-level requirements and in a front-end DMRB document, you're trying to put forward standards that apply to that very broad suite of possibilities. In doing so, there are opportunities and risks associated with that. So we hope that we require that you'll consider those opportunities and risks while considering sustainable development and good design. And the core bit of this really is that 12 goals of sustainable development and 10 principles of good road design apply. That really is where we're sort of marking out what we perceive sustainable development to be and good road design to be in design. This is what we think sustainable development means to the design of the strategic road network. So you've got those 12 goals and those 10 principles that shall be applied. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we're just ending on some links and further information. There are references in the GG103 document which support some of the clauses, but there are also some wider links that I thought I would like to kind of flag up to you all, which help put GG103 in context. If you're new to sustainable development, or if you're well versed in some aspects of sustainable development and less so in other aspects that might be considered by the 12 goals of sustainable development, or even if you're an expert, it's always worth looking at the supply chain sustainability school. That's a real resource for sustainable development. It's there's an awful lot of information on there which can help you understand about, for instance, the circular economy or lowering carbon, for instance. So that's a really good resource to look at. I'd also encourage you to look at Highways England's Sustainable Development Strategy. Actually, the goals of sustainable development in this standard build on the ambition of that sustainable development strategy. So they sort of articulate what we mean by sustainable development in the design context. But to get a broad vision and ambition for sustainable development as Highways England perceives it, it's worth referring to that link to the Sustainable Development Strategy. Ken talked about his principles of good design. You'll notice that well, everything in DMRB requires a particular language, and I talked about the verb forms, the musts, the shalls, that sort of thing. So there's a certain way to writing a DMRB document. But for a very easy to read and document which really kind of articulates what good road design is, we'd recommend you go to the Road to Good Design and read them alongside this GD 103 document. And a final resource to mention is the Highways England Strategic Design Panel website. This makes various recommendations to improve design quality and outcomes. So that their website is a really useful resource to look at. Finally, there are some further training sessions which are planned on good design and design review in February, so you'll receive an invitation to these in due course. So just you'll see at the bottom of that slide, if you've got any questions, suggestions or feedback, do email us and we'll get back to you. And there's an email address for DMRB training as well. I hope you've had a chance to ask a few instant messages and things. I'm afraid I can't actually see them because I do not have web access at the moment due to a cutout. But what we will do is we will respond to all of your questions and really help clarify what we mean by sustainable development and good design.
Thank you, Colin. There is one question on here that you might be able to answer straight away, actually,
okay.
Which would be really handy. It was from Jessica Postens and says, do the goals link with the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, absolutely, yes, yeah. We were very conscious of the UN Sustainable Development Goals as we developed the goals of sustainable development in this document. We used a variety of sources really to construct those goals and make sure they were applicable to road design. But yes, the SDGs, you can certainly draw parallels to the SDGs, and that was really, well, the starting point for constructing many of these goals. So yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Colin. The remainder of the questions and comments raised will be responded to following on from this presentation. So thank you all very much for your time.